right, so this week's movement of the week is going to be the goblet squat. So I'm actually going to mostly demo this with a kettlebell just because a kettlebell is a little bit easier to hold. But we also have dumbbells obviously available to us at most gyms. So if you don't have kettlebells, just go ahead and use dumbbells, but just preface that. So goblet squat. Goblet squat is going to be like pretty much the foundational bilateral squat pattern that most people are going to progress into from any kind of like unilateral split squat. Goblet squat, then typically we're going to go into like a front squat variation and then maybe eventually a back squat variation if you meet all of the prerequisites. Goblet squats are a great foundational movement for most people because they actually eliminate a lot of the risks associated with any of like the heavier barbell related squats. So goblet squat, you're going to hold the load in front of your chest like this. So with the kettlebell, you can hold onto the horns, or like I like to do, I like to flip it up and hold onto the actual body of the bell like that. So in this position, you can see I kind of allow the horns to rest on my chest, and I keep my elbows right under here, just form a nice little shelf. So I'm not just trying to hold it like that and rely on my forearms and my biceps rather than, just kind of getting into a nice comfortable position here and just relying more on my posture. So from this position, we're gonna hold the kettlebell up, gonna get a nice shoulder width stance, and to just execute this squat pattern, all we're doing is we're dropping our hips, making sure our knees are right in line with our toes, allowing a little bit of forward knee translation to go over our toes, and just getting as deep as we can into the movement comfortably. So whatever our mobility allows for. So here, and then all the way back up. Some people are obviously going to have different mobility requirements than others. For me, I can typically get to about parallel comfortably, so that's what I'm gonna stick to. It's very important to remember, with this goblet position, you wanna keep your elbows up. If you get to the bottom of the movement and your upper back starts to give out or your mobility starts to give out, what's gonna happen is this, here, and then you start collapsing and folding down at the bottom. But with a goblet squat, it's nice because if you do get to that point, what you can do, instead of like a barbell squat where you'd just be pretty much screwed, goblet squat, you're here, you get to the bottom, you kind of fold over, you just drop it. Safe enough. So very, very easy in that sense to fail or bail on a goblet squat compared to a barbell squat, which is why it's a nice regression, nice starting point for most people. But what we can do with anybody that has mobility concerns with a goblet squat, it's almost always going to be alleviated with elevating the heels to create a better angle at the ankle joint. So a lot of people are just gonna be limited by their ankle mobility, and then that's gonna feed up the chain and prevent them from getting a nice deep range of motion. What you can do there is elevate the heels, and from this position, imagine I'm holding onto a kettlebell. You just squat all the way down, maintain that same form, and back up. Alternatively, if you don't have the wedges, you can use some kind of a bumper plate like this and do the same thing, making sure that that chest is up, elevated, everything is nice and beautiful there. So as we go through the goblet squat mistakes that I see, just understand that these mistakes are more complex just because we're working with a pretty complex movement pattern. So while they are gonna be a little bit more general, understand that there are a lot of very specific ways that we can break down these more, generalized mistakes. So the first thing I wanna go through is just allowing your integrity of your foot and also by extension your knees to be compromised. So I'm actually gonna take my shoes off for this so that everyone will be able to see it a little bit better by what I mean. So whenever we're performing a squat pattern, it's really important that we maintain a good foot integrity and a good arch in our foot. So a lot of times whenever we're wearing shoes, the shoes will just kind of force us into a really bad foot position, and it actually collapses our arch, which in turn collapses our knees. So you kind of see how those things work in coordination there. So whenever we're performing a squat pattern, we want to make sure that that arch and our feet are actually very stable and rigid, so that as we're performing our squat pattern, our arch here will feed up into our knees, which feeds up in our hips, and we can actually maintain that pattern very, very comfortably. So what that's gonna look like whenever it breaks down is this. So here, starting from a good position, as I start going down into the squat, my arches will start to collapse, my feet will internally rotate a little bit here, and then my knees collapse as well. And then from there, I'm coming up and pushing up and squatting up in a very unstable position. So that's gonna be a lot of stress at the knee and hip joint. We don't really want that. So again, we want very strong feet, very strong hips, very strong knees. Want to be able to maintain that arch. So another position, or another mistake, excuse me, that I see often is I'll just demo this without actually using the kettlebell. People rolling up on their toes at the bottom of the movement because they don't have enough ankle mobility. Like what we were talking about with the cues, if you don't have the ankle mobility, it's much better to just slide something under your heels to get a little bit of elevation rather than trying to force it down. Because what happens whenever you force it down is either you're gonna be here and then falling forward, or you're gonna be here and sliding up into your toes. Neither one of those are really great for health and also force output. So if you do feel yourself sliding or rolling onto your toes at the bottom to be able to maintain your balance, better just slide something under your heels so you can maintain that same tripod position on your foot with the pressure on your toes and also on your heels. You don't want to roll all the way under your toes at the bottom. And then the last thing that I often see with any kind of squat pattern, especially goblet squats, is range of motion issues. So goblet squats are going to be great for quad development, glute development, adductor development, all of the things, but that's provided on getting a full range of motion, whatever is full to you. So it can be too shallow, and that's a pretty big problem, but it can also be an extension of trying to push too far into the range of motion beyond what you actually have naturally. So if we're performing a squat and we're only squatting to here, we're not getting very much out of the movement. We're just overloading our knees. But again, like what we were just talking about with rolling on our toes, if we try to squat further than the range of motion that we have, we're gonna get some butt wink here where we go down and then our hips roll under, or we're going to just fall into our toes. So something has to give if you don't have the range of motion. Either you're going to have to supplement with a heel elevation, potentially even shifting your center of gravity forward a little bit with the kettlebell, or if you don't have the range of motion, or excuse me, if you're not getting enough range of motion, you're gonna have to just make sure that you either lighten the load or you do something a little bit different to actually get into that full range of motion comfortably to get the most out of the movement.